So here we are
Here we are.
in Portugal.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. I know it was a hectic setup to get to this point.
I kind of enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Watching with your I know you.
Yeah. You know how we deal.
Exactly. I think you're at your most.
Yeah.
What's your assessment?
Good teamwork.
You think so?
No one got angry. Yeah, no, I feel you worked it out,
All right. Well, I'm glad we got through it. So you are now our third guest on this podcast. So I think it would be appropriate to, maybe do some introductions. So we've known each other for a couple of years.
That's true.
And what I know about you is that you are this incredible spirit who's actively serving as a bridge between the physical and spiritual world for many, many people around the world. And I also know that you're doing intuition courses and bringing women into tune with themselves and how to guide themselves through their intuition. So that's what I kind of know. I would love for you to fill in the gaps.
No, that's great. Yeah, I work as a psychic medium, which is the bridging of this physical world with the spiritual. It's a bridging not because we're going anywhere else, but we're wanting to translate energy into words. So that's what I do, regardless of whether it is somebody who's passed over or somebody who's living. There's a bridging of energy, awareness, consciousness into physical words so that we know what's happening on an energetic plane. And then I teach people how to do that. So you were right.
Yeah. I mean, I've had just a taste of it, like a very small window of you looking into. I passed, and it was a wild experience.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what it's like full on. I feel like a good place to start would be, how did you get into this? Like, where did this ability come from? Like, walk us through the beginning of this.
Yeah. People always want to know what was the first moment, but I actually don't have memories of the first moment. It was an awareness that my family had of me, because when you're, 3, 4, 5, your reality you think is everyone else's reality. There's no distinction between your reality versus what somebody else might perceive. So for me, that was just my day-to-day. I don't have many memories of it, but from what I gather from family, friends, of the families, I would know things, see things, talk to people that were apparently not in the room, but in very factual ways. So I would speak about people's loved ones in spirit, but be able to give like their nicknames or have like a conversation and give very factual information. So my parents, very fact-driven people. My mom at the time worked as a journalist, my dad engineer. They looked at it as, well, she's not wrong. It's obviously not imagination. There's something going on here. And then through like a weird or perhaps meant to be coincidence, my nanny at the time was a psychic. And so she, very separately from my parents realizing this, had an experience where she told my dad, like, hey, your daughter is a psychic medium. And they were like, okay, well, that's great. Just keep being the nanny, please. Like, we like you and like, that's fine. But it confirmed some of what they were feeling. I was really lucky in that I grew up in a household where no one necessarily encouraged it, but no one discouraged it. So it was just my thing. And I wanted nothing to do with it. So for me, it was a big part of my childhood. There's many other layers to that, other random things that would happen to me. Like random people would come up to me and my family and they'd be like, oh, like your daughter, she has a gift, like at least 3 times a year, like the baker, my mom's doctor. We would walk in, like, I don't know, random people. They'd be like, I never tell anybody this. I have a little bit of a gift, but I just want to let you know, like your daughter is gift, blah, blah, blah. And I would, at a certain point when I was like 8 or 9, I would just go, oh my God, these people with the cult of like the psychic mediums, like why do they keep up coming to me, And then my sister's like, they never come up to me. so it was just kind of this exactly, this like random thing. It kept happening, but I just, from the time I kind of knew what was going on, I wanted nothing to do with it.
So what was the transition point? You're like, went from wanting nothing to do with it to finally becoming something that you embrace.
Yeah, well, I got really sick. So I went to college at UCLA. I was hell-bent on becoming a neurosurgeon, to the point where graduation party, friend's dad walked up to me and he said, you know, people always change their major. Like, what else would you want to be versus a neurosurgeon? I was like, oh no, sir, not me. Like, this is what I'm going to be. Like, 100%. And I fought like hell to get to do it. But that first year of college, I'm taking all the science classes and I just start getting really sick. And no one knows what's going on with me. I have to sleep like 15 hours, brain fog, can't like remember anything. My whole identity flipped upside down. You know, I had to take 3 months off of school for somebody who at the time was going to go to med school and be A plus student. Like, that was an identity crisis in and of itself, like taking time off of school. But couldn't do the sports that I was doing, like really had to kind of quit everything. And at a time of desperation, my dad, I remember winter break, he said, why don't you go and just see someone who does stuff like that? You know, the people that would come up to you when you were younger, the thing that your nanny did, like, you never know, you were really strange. And I'd be like, oh no, Dad, I just had a big imagination. And he was like, you know what, we witnessed it. Like, don't tell me that was imagination, because it wasn't. Like, I walked through that when you were a kid, so I know it wasn't your imagination. So I went to this lady in LA, sat down. She didn't know anything about me. This is also 2008, 2009, so it wasn't like there was a lot of stuff on the internet, or, you know, I had like a MySpace, but nothing about like this kind of stuff on there at all.
Were you still receiving transmissions at this time,
Not
like when
at
you were in
all.
UCLA? And
No, I had shut it down. There had nothing had happened with the exception of maybe like two things. One, and this is a tangent, but when I was 16 and there was he was still my dear friend today, but he was a friend of mine who was going to ask me to like a homecoming dance, and I didn't want to go with him. I wanted to go with another guy, but I was good friends with him, so I didn't want to say no. And all of a sudden I'm in chemistry lab and I hand all my stuff to my girlfriend and I'm like, I gotta go. And she's like, where are you going? I was like, I don't know, but I gotta go. And I dash out as he comes in like 2 minutes later with a guitar and roses in a tuxedo. She's like, you were gone. We were like, I don't know where she went. She was like, I was out. Like, my whole being was like, gotta get out of here, gotta get out of here. So it was like these little intuitive moments would happen, but nothing big. You know, I would just be like, I don't know how I knew that, but like, I need to leave. So that was it. And I could like really discredit that by going, well, I don't know, you know, I've probably just felt it or something. So at 18, I haven't felt, seen, heard anything in quite a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I go see this psychic medium because I'm not well. And I sit down, it's this little LA apartment. I sit down, she goes, well, you're a medium and you're not living your purpose. And if you don't live your purpose, you're going to get very sick and you will die. And it was like the first 90 seconds. I was like, excuse me? Like, what do you mean? Like, I don't have a choice in this at all? So she said a bunch of other stuff afterwards that I don't remember. It wasn't like super memorable, but it was really those first 90 seconds. That's really all I needed to hear. Walked out. I remember sitting on a stoop right in Hollywood. The Bodhi Tree bookstore still existed at that time, which is like the spiritual bookstore. And I went in afterwards and I bought a bunch of books, but the whole entire time, like, I was just so pissed at God. If there was a God, I was like, what? Like, I don't get a choice in this? Like, this is some bullshit. Like, I don't even believe in this. I just want to be a doctor. Like, let me go be a doctor. That's good too. Like, you know? So I really spent the next 2 years being very reluctantly studying it, but then couldn't deny that I was really interested at the same time. So I would read like everything under the sun. I started practicing. I worked under a fake name for 5 years because I still wanted to go to med school, and did readings for free, would drive in LA for like 2 hours to do an hour session and then drive back, and I charged like $20. Like it didn't even cover gas kind of thing. Do you know? Because I was like, I will pay you to let me read you because I don't know if this is real and I just need to figure it out for myself. So I kind of became very obsessed, and that was the switch. But it really was that reading that I thought, well, you're not wrong. My health's not great. And I think a lot of times we don't realize that we don't have anything unless we have our health. So because the health was taken away, like everything else was taken away too. And I just had this massive identity crisis at age 18, 19, because I had nothing. Like everything was gone, you know? And so it was really, yeah, I was like, well, I guess I'm going to start meditating. I'm like, damn it.
And did your health improve
It
once
did,
you
yeah.
started leaning into this
It
gift?
did. It was slow, but it did improve. It took a while, but it did improve. And I think I was still really resistant for a very long time as well. Yeah, but it did.
How did it feel to get that information as if you don't have free will?
Well, I sat like on this stoop in Hollywood, just being like, yeah, like this is unfair.
It's like, because I feel like we kind of have this ability, like as people that interact with spirits, kind of dance how we please. Like there's no obligation for me to do the energy work. There's no obligation for Elijah to do Akashic record keeping versus the message you got, which is like, do this or you are going to die.
Yeah. I still sometimes feel this way about people like you, where I'm like, must be nice to just get to like waltz in and out of it as you please. No, it was really interesting during that period of time. I ended up calling my nanny, who is still living, and because she's my mom's age, and I called her and I was like, what do I do with this? She's like, well, you just decide how much of your life you will dedicate to this work. She's like, maybe you decide, I don't know, like 80% or 85%. And I remember being like, what? Like I was thinking maybe 10%, like 15%,
Yeah.
And now it's like, no, it's actually like 95%. Little did I know. But yeah, it's a wonderful thing because there is also a real sense of purpose in it, but I think it took me a really long time to find the choice within it, and then I kind of leaned in at a certain point where I was like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I will dedicate myself to it fully. Like if I'm going to do this, I will be, and I don't want this to sound from an ego place, but I really was like, I will do this to the absolute best capacity and I will push the field forward. Like I'm not going to just do this and waltz through it in a way that has no effect. Like I feel like that drive that I wanted to put into medicine, or that drive that I wanted to put into something else, into academia, I was like, it has to exist within that spiritual realm. And in 2009, it didn't really look like that was going to be possible. Like my thought was, okay, well, worst case scenario, my car is, I don't have payments, it's paid off, so I guess I could sleep there. But that was kind of like if I do readings for $20, like where is this gonna go, right? So I didn't really have that spectrum that it has now, or like the awareness that it has now. Like no one was doing this. This is not in anyone's, just interest at the time, I think.
So what did the trajectory look like after college? What did that look like? Because you're at UCLA, you go and see this person, they tell you if you don't lean into this gift, you're going to die. You end up leaning into it. What did you finish school?
I did.
Okay, so what happened after school?
Still reluctant, still not super great health-wise. So I'm like, well, I'll take a year off and then I'll go to med school. And I will do readings for a year. And I'll still work under that fake name and no one will ever know. And then I will go to med school. And it really was, I think, in that year afterwards where I was still charging quite little, but had a month wait list and then a 3-month wait list. And it was during that period of time where people would be like writing me letters and emails of gratitude, and I really took a very scientific approach to it in a way where I would listen back to my readings and I would chart how accurate it was, I would say, okay, well, if I said she was maternal, maybe a 0.5. But if I said she has 2 kids, like that's a full point, right? Like that's a yes.
Did you have an actual scoring
I
system?
did, yes. I did the standard deviation on it, all the rest of it. And at that point, I was like, there was a 90% accuracy, and the standard deviation was very low. And that was kind of the moment where I started going, okay, all right,
Maybe
like,
all these people weren't tripping. Yeah.
well, because in the beginning, you're like, I'm giving you a reading and I don't know your mom. I don't know your dad. So you're telling me yes, but do you just want it to be true? So in the beginning, I would really struggle with this rational side of me where they'd be like, yeah, she had 3 kids. I'm like, but did she? Like, are you just saying yes? Like, are you sure? Like, she had 3, So I was really struggling, and I just for years, couldn't wrap my rational head around it. And I still will experience, and my students always love when I say this, but like every 18 months, I will have like a total existential crisis where I wake up and I'm like, what if there's no spirit world? I wrote a book about this. Like, I'm like, oh my God, uh-oh. Like, and I kind of spin out, and then it takes me like a day or two to be like, no, like it's real. It's good. Like, it's all good. But I think I've noticed it's when my own spiritual input um, isn't isn't matching up with the spiritual output, so to speak, and then I get a bit disconnected, and it immediately triggers all of the conflict that I had for those first couple of years. But yeah, I did the whole scientific thing on it.
Yeah. Well, so you talk a lot about the science.
Yes.
And I know that the people that you're hanging out with, some of the machines they're connecting you up to, like what excites you most about the future of where this is all heading?
I think one, I want the proof. I'm like, I really want this to be, but also beyond that, I'm at a place in my work where I feel like I don't want to be shooting in the dark, right? I want to know if I'm teaching people, if I'm guiding people to reading energy, what is the best way to calibrate the nervous system, the brain states, to have people be able to experience that spiritual awareness. I don't necessarily need to know it's true anymore. I know that. I'm more interested as like, how can we use technology to find the frequency range, to figure out where and how we're interacting with it so that everyone could, in theory, or anyone who's interested. That's what's exciting for me about that scientific realm, because for a long time I felt it's not that it doesn't exist, we just don't have the tools to measure it yet. So whatever electromagnetic range we're looking at, spectrum, maybe we just don't know or don't have fine-tuned enough equipment to figure out where. And yeah, that makes me excited.
Yeah.
What has it brought to your life that you hope that it brings to other people's lives? Because it sounds like part of this is, some excitement or looking forward to when, or
Yeah.
having other people tap into their gifts and access those gifts.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel regardless of whether it's like a reading or an experience you have yourself, there is a moment in which what once mattered doesn't matter as much. So it's a shift of where your priorities are and where your values are. And it's quite a beautiful experience to watch in other people as well as myself to not be so swayed by what we should be doing externally, but get to tap into that mystery of what you're here to do, right? I think it all boils back down to that. And then, of course, as the work of a medium, it's really nice to watch when people get really stuck in life because of a loss, because of a really big grieving phase that you can help shift through them having their own experience or through them hearing it through you, that there's like, oh, I can keep going. that there is a continuation, and that means I can let go of a part of that grieving loop I was in, right? So for me, it's all about bigger picture, I suppose.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And it seems like the entryway that you provide for people is intuition. And I'm
Yeah.
curious what you see as the relationship between intuition and mediumship.
Yeah. So I love this question, because when I was working through all of this stuff early on, the term intuition was kind of seen as a dumbed down psychic, right? Like, oh, intuition is like the little psychic thing. And this really for me was like such a light bulb. About 5, 6 years ago, I was living a life in which I was very good at reading psychically for other people. I was very good at the medium connection, which is all about people who've passed. So the psychic being living, the medium being passed over. And I was terrible about information about myself, like horrific. Friends would come up to me, they're like, everyone could see that. Like, you do this for a living. Why did you not see that? I was so disconnected from self that I was receiving no information about me. And that for me was a light bulb, because I was like, well, we don't have a term for that to distinguish what's external and what's internal. And so I named that intuition. Intuition being about you, which for sensitives is mind blowing. And this is a lot of the bulk of my students, especially if you're sensitive. They're like, oh, yeah, I get information about other people all the time, not getting about me. And the thing is, if you can't differentiate between energetic information externally or internally, then you're kind of losing all the power within your own life to shape or create or even manifest, if you will, right? You're not in an energetic flow within your own bubble. It's great to be of service, but I think a lot of times when people are externally connected and only getting the psychic, they're ping-ponging around all over the place. And that's true on a physical level, right? If you're just like listening to everybody else or doing what everybody thinks you should do, but it's also very true on an energetic level. So the reason I start with intuition is if you can create that energy flow within yourself, information for you, whether it's you in conversation for someone and you just know that person's a good person to have in my life, it's still intuition because it's for you, versus you meeting someone and going like, I just feel like they're going to have a baby in the next year or whatever it is, right? That's not about you. That doesn't matter. That's just like in their own energetic space. But I think that differentiation is so key, because once you know how to manage the energy flow within yourself, it means you can also pull back when you need to. You can engage when you need to. From there on, all the other stuff is quite simple. You can do the psychic, you can do the mediumship, because you've got a container and you know how your energy works within yourself.
And you mentioned sensitives almost as this maybe baseline profile of somebody. I'm curious if you see sensitive to intuitive, is that a progression? Is that what you're aiming to bring people to?
Yeah, kind of. I'm still working this one out, because I think it's a spectrum. Everyone is sensitive, but it's effective or it's ineffective. And if it's ineffective, it could be that you're just not feeling anything, like you've shut yourself down. But it could also be ineffective if you're feeling way too much. And we put that term sensitive as people who are feeling way too much, but it's not effective. They're overstimulated very easily. But I wonder if the people who aren't feeling anything, if it's just the other side of the spectrum, and they were so overstimulated that they were like, shut it down. Right?
Totally. Yeah.
So I think there's this spectrum, and wherever you find yourself, perhaps we're all sensitive, and it's just about finding that really good flow as to what you need, where your nervous system works best, so that you can really kind of come in and out of where you want to find the information and where you want to focus.
Yeah, I would love to learn more about, you talk about the sensitivity and the orientation. The orientation of the intuition. And this is one of the key insights last time we met where I'm like, holy shit. Like, this explains so much. I would love to get your take on that.
Yeah. So I have a theory, if you will, that the way intuition works is everything is energetic information, like everything. And we're sponges to our environment. we're constantly sponging up this information. And for it to be intuition or for it to be psychic or anything, it has to be translated by the physical body. Nothing happens outside the physical body. It's always within it. So you will either feel a gut feeling, you will get an emotion, you will have a visual image, you will have a thought, but it has to be translated by this physical vessel that we have. It's the best translation it can give to match the energetic information that's coming in. But our subconscious prioritizes certain information based off of the life we've lived. And often I see that the three categories people prioritize is either survival, people you love, or what you love. So you've already set some barrier to the energetic information that's flowing up without knowing it. And this is the reason why some people will come in and be like, I don't get it. I'm very psychic or I'm very aware, but I only get negative information. And it's probably because they're very much in survival mode, or they're very much somebody who's like looking at the news every day or just very fearful, right? Some people only get information about big world events, whereas other people only get information about their closest loved ones. It's a very interesting thing to watch what the subconscious prioritizes. There's no way we could bridge up everything. And our body knows that and our mind knows that there's so much information energetically out in the world. I think where this kind of throws people is there is a belief where we look at, oh, well, my higher self is giving it to me or God is giving it to me. And I'm not saying that that can't play a role, but I think there's also just a truth to the subconscious prioritizes the information and you're getting what you prioritized, right? What you're paying attention to. And that is what I think you're talking about, which is, the information that rises up to the surface being categorical in a certain way.
Yeah. I mean, because the more I thought through it, I was actually going through like the different stages of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And it actually all tracked back to the way my intuition is orienting. So like, when I was previously my last job I had before starting this company, it was really about who I love. I put all of my attention in there. It was a point very early on my entrepreneurial journey where it's survival based. And then it shifted to what I love. And that's what has been very, very focused on last year. And now I almost feel like a shifting almost a little bit back into who I love, but giving more attention to friends and family. So I actually think this is an underlying operating system that you've identified that can actually be like a real part of people's journeys. Like at what stage of life and then is actually a function of how they're orienting. Because even men are like, oh, I'm not really focused on relationships right now. How many times have you heard that, right?
Yeah.
It's what they're saying.
Yeah, and I would love to see what Elijah thinks about that, if it tracks for you too, if you've watched, because for some people it will change, like for you, and others it's just like steady. So I'm curious if you've watched it change.
I haven't actually paid attention to that, but I do know that in different yogic philosophies, and specifically when I was deep into Kundalini yoga, there's this understanding that where your attention goes, your prana flows, right? Prana being the life force that we all contain. And so I'm hearing that it might be a little similar kind of mirroring of that when it comes to receiving this information as well. Yeah. And where your attention goes or where you're oriented towards might create the pathway for the information.
Yeah.
I actually have not paid attention to that in my life. But now that we're having this conversation, I'm definitely going to be paying attention to it.
And do you believe that it can be trained? Absolutely. You can, like the person can choose the default orientation of their intuition.
Yes. Yeah, I've watched it change. I think you can even change the way you receive it. You prioritize certain senses over others. It's all this flow, right? It's energetic information. It hits your own spirit in whatever way that happens, bridges up through the physical into the conscious awareness. And it has to, for it to be intuition, it has to bridge into conscious awareness, or it's not translated all the way. That last moment of translation is when you're like, I have a thought, I'm seeing this, I have a feeling about something. And at every step of that process, there are ways we can maximize and ways we minimize. So when we're bridging up, for example, in the physical body, if the nervous system is overstimulated, if you're in fight or flight all the time, if there's no space to receive, if you're not in a brain state that allows it, you're not bridging it up at all. And the same is true for the subconscious. I think when we're saying, what do we prioritize, what do we not prioritize, a lot of that has to do with limiting belief systems. If you are in a constant state of believing that you are not safe, all you will be bridging up is information about survival. So you can start to unravel that and take a look at, okay, if this is what I'm bridging up, one, do I like it? And if not, where's it getting stuck? Is it the subconscious beliefs? Is it what I'm just filling my days with? Is it me actually just having to bring conscious awareness to the fact that I would like to open it up more? Sometimes that's as simple as it needs to be for certain people. It's just that moment of recognition.
And when you say bridging up, do you mean like things that are happening in the subconscious bridging up to the mind?
No, I mean energetic information getting translated. So I have this metaphor that might work for you to help understand what I mean by the bridging. When we listen to music, we can completely identify as that just being vibrational, right? Like we can all agree that until music hits our ear, it's just vibration. And there's a moment in which we translate it into meaning. And so we could translate that into an A flat or C sharp or whatever it is. And if you are musically gifted, you might instantly know the translation. But maybe you're not a savant in this way, and you need a keyboard, and you go down the keyboard and you get to C sharp, and you're still hearing this vibration, and you're like, yeah, that's a match. Now my conscious rational mind can say, it's C sharp. We've translated energy into conscious rational thought. And we're doing the same thing with our environment all the time. Now, the way you bridge up is the way you translate. It's not a perfect system in the beginning because most people haven't paid a lot of attention to how their intuition bridges up. So it's like your systems, your body's best way to translate. It doesn't have an exact translation in the beginning, but it can with practice. But in the meantime, it's doing like the best job. So maybe this person isn't going to be a great business partner for you, might just be like a pit in your stomach. That's the best translation you got in that moment, right? Like you haven't spent a lot of time translating, so that's what you got. But that's what I mean when it's bridging up.
Yeah. And what do you feel like you've identified the specific ways the intuition orients for people?
Yeah.
Do you feel like there's also consistencies in the way you see how people experience intuition? Like what are the most common ways, or what are some surprising ones?
Yeah, that bridging that we've talked about, I see that as people having a pattern, and the pattern is often repeated in people. So you might have 2 patterns or 3 patterns, but you're never going to really deviate all that much. It's your way of translating. It's the way you've been translating, whether you realized it or not. It's going to be the path of least resistance, and that's your pattern. So you'll watch people in similar patterns, and it can range. Like for me, one type of intuition pattern that I have is a thought, completely neutral, runs through my head as if it's a train. I can't repeat it in the same way. If I said it to myself, it would be in a different voice at a different speed. It is completely emotionless. It's completely untriggered. And if it shows up in that way, I just know that's intuition. I don't have to question it at this time. I don't have to be like, what is that? I just recognize the pattern. It checks the 10 boxes, right? I'm like, thought, emotionless, neutral, came out of nowhere, came in like a train, went from left to right, can't repeat it. That's my pattern. So while I might have other patterns that do include emotion, when it comes in like that, it's so consistent that is mine. And but it could also be very physical. For example, my mom, if she hears something that's very true, like when somebody says the truth, even if you don't like it, it's true. Whatever it is, something's going to happen, or whatever the outcome. If it's true, she gets goosebumps. Like her physical body responds to it. It's like a match, right? So everyone has their own pattern. And this is what I do with my students is I have them identify it. And then we also look at, like, how does your body respond to other emotions that also have patterns? Everyone's anxiety, for example, has a pattern. It might not be somebody else's pattern, but your anxiety isn't going to go rogue one day and show up in a different way. Like, everyone has the same type of bodily reaction to fear. And it's your reaction, it's your pattern. So once you start doing a little bit of self-awareness around that, it gives a lot of stability, because if it doesn't follow the pattern, you don't have to be questioning, is this intuition or not? You're like, it's not. It doesn't follow the pattern. So I need to go do something to calm myself down, because like this is not it, you know?
And one thing I really love that I haven't heard in a lot of different contexts in regards to psychic transmission or channeling or mediumship is actually this measurement of accuracy. I feel like in the spaces and tables and coaches and mentors that I've been around, it's never been spoken about and has never been encouraged to actually go in and measure the accuracy of the information.
Yeah.
And I love that, that you were this kind of data-driven neuroscience, like down that path, and applied that to this intuitive work. Yeah. And I feel like in a lot of people's minds or orientations, intuition and measurement may not exist at the same table or in the same conversation. So when you're, I guess, teaching or when you're coaching or when you're working with others and allowing them to access their gifts, is this something that you encourage them to do? Is this something where you give them that numeric scale or system to measure the accuracy of their information? Pretty much how has that played out? Because I know you mentioned that in regards to your earlier years, but how has that played out in your work now?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I don't look at it so much as accuracy, but I do look at it as it's systematic. And the tricky thing about intuition is you can't think your way into intuition. You have to be in flow. But the brain is very, I think, unsettled when it doesn't know the territory, when it doesn't know what to expect, when it doesn't have rules of the road. So we do the structuring and the setting up the patterns so that the brain can go, oh, I know what's happening, right? So it's not even the brain, it's like your mind can kind of go, okay, I don't have to be busy figuring it out. I just have already done that. I've laid the foundation. I've done the structure. And then I work with people on getting into those flow states. And it's a continuous looping back to say, okay, now that we're in the flow and we're watching this unfold, what do we like about it? What do we not like about it? Let's go back to the structuring. And the structuring is done in the subconscious. The structuring is done in understanding the patterns. But it's quite nice because then if you do have this intuition come up in a flow state, and it is following your pattern, you don't have to go back to the mind getting out of flow, being like, is it not? Is it not? Right? Because now you're out. So you have to, it's the tricky thing about teaching, and it's the tricky thing about intuition is you want to understand it, you want to be systematic, but in that space, you won't actually get the intuition. So you look at it as you're laying the foundation, you're giving the mind something to relax about, because you're getting it. And then we work on those flow states.
Yeah, but I like the thought of an intuition feedback loop, right? Because we all have intuition. You're like, I think it's going to rain today, even though it's sunny outside. Like all these like little things happen. Or like, oh, I'm going to go run into Jessie Lynn an hour, right? Yeah. And you notice when it's affirmed, but it's way more fleeting when it's not affirmed.
Yeah.
Where you have this sort of intuition as to what's going to happen. And then, it's kind of like this winner's bias, right?
Yeah.
Versus having an honest reflection of, I've intuited this piece of information, and whether or not it comes true, I think that's also valuable feedback.
Yeah.
I feel like that could be the mechanism that gets you to that checklist that you were mentioning, right? You're saying that there's this checklist of distinguishing between intuitive transmitted information and what might be tied to your own three-dimensional self. And maybe that feedback loop can get someone to better understand what their checklist is.
Yeah.
And in the work that I've been doing, we call that, or we have a term of key markers of like, what are your key markers and how do they show up in your body?
Yeah.
Like, what is a yes? What does affirmation feel like in your body? What does a no feel like in your body? What does neutral really feel like in your body? And in terms of tapping into this intuition, thinking of that feedback loop, right? And using that as a mechanism to get to understanding what is your checklist and what does that look like for you? Because from my understanding, it can be different for everybody. That can show up differently.
Absolutely. And what you're talking about, we also do, I would call that direct intuition versus indirect intuition. The indirect is like, it just comes. You didn't go looking for it. Direct is, can you stay in the flow state and ask the question and get that yes, no, or maybe? It's the next layer, right? But yes, it's the same thing, and your body's going to translate the information. I tell my students, like, this is not about you creating the information. The information is there. You don't have to worry about collecting it. Like, it's there. You've already absorbed it. You've already cared about it. Your only process, your only job is, how do I bridge it up? How do I translate? How do I understand what I'm translating? And how do I make myself available to? So yeah, absolutely. What you're saying, same thing, just from the perspective of you're initiating it versus you're just perceiving it.
And with this focus on intuition with your students, is there, when you're at a place where you can access your intuition or tap into your intuition or be intuitive, is then the trajectory, if you will, is the trajectory from there to move into mediumship or to move into psychic, or is it really focused on intuition and let's get there?
I think it's whatever you want it to be, right? Like, I'd say right now, 80 to 90% of my students don't want to be psychic mediums. And I don't blame them, but I feel like it's not about that. It's about, we are energetic beings. There's so much information in the world on an energetic level that might be in conflict with the information we're hearing physically or telling or being told we should do. And that's true in any profession across the board. I also think that, yes, sure, we call psychic reading as tapping into somebody's energy. But really, if we took it outside of that, we're looking at, I'm being an ambassador to your own knowing, right? I believe a psychic isn't pulling information from the ethers. It's pulling it from the person, spirit in front of them. They've absorbed all that information too, right? Maybe it's not bridging up for them. Maybe they're not aware of it. You can be an ambassador to their own knowing. You can help them bridge it up. But you can do that in anything. Therapists, medical world, your relationship, child to parent, helping anyone translate something, even if a friend, right? They're like kind of stuck. They can't get out of the question place into the answer place. You're just being an ambassador for what they already know. That's also psychic.
Earlier in the conversation, Nick asked about, the future of this. And when you were speaking of leaning into these gifts in those earlier days and having that mindset of, okay, if I'm going to lean in, I want to change the game. Like, I want to come in and actually have an impact in this. I'm curious to know, where do you want to take your own work from here? Like, where's the work of Fleur heading? Like, where's that going? Where do you want that to go?
Yeah, I think right now teaching is a great place for me to become more and more aware of how it works for other people, right? The more people I engage with, the more information I get as to how and where people get stuck. So I think I'm really right now in my researching phase where I'm like, okay, like, tell me more. Why didn't that work for you, right? Like, what can we do to make it work for you in particular? It's working for 95% of people. Why is it not working for this 5%? Where are we getting stuck? So I think that's where I'm at right now. As Nick mentioned earlier, I'm also really excited to be working with a research institute, and where I want to take it is hopefully one day to merge the two, to get very scientific, to create a methodology that can really take somebody I mean, the methodology is kind of already there, but to get it so exact that we can also bring science into it, we can bring brain waves into it, we can create this structure that you walk in, you're at point A, you walk out, you're at point B, and you've taught yourself how to get into the space where you are in flow. And we use, I think where science can be really, really, really helpful is with neurofeedback. You can watch yourself do it, right? And that is very, very, very helpful because now you're like, oh, that's when I hit the target. I think this is where that self-awareness and that technology, if we know where to look, if we know what works best, I'm excited about that. I'm just I think at the baseline of it, I'm quite curious. So when it's like, what do you want to create? I'm always like, well, I just want to know more, right? So I'm in that like wherever it goes, I want to know more. I want to dig deeper. I want to get more specific. The container of that, I don't know. Yeah.
And at the moment, what's your allocation of your time and your resources in regards to actually reading and transmitting and being a medium for people versus teaching and passing this on to others?
Yeah, well, I'm working too much at the moment, but I have an amazing team, and we're really like building. But even so, if I look back at this last week, I did 15 readings, 4 interviews, and I taught for 4 hours. So it was a lot on top of like emails and meetings and like, they're busy days. So yeah, they're busy days. I would say most days I still do about 3 readings. But that's my absolute max, and I was laughing about it the other day with someone where we're not laughing, but I was like, it's wild to me that I used to do 15 readings in a week, and that was like all I did, and I was just fried, right? But it's amazing how much you can kind of like continue to evolve. It is funny though, because when I teach only, I do miss the readings. There's something about being in that flow. And then if I'm only doing the readings, I miss the teaching. So finding a balance is definitely where my work's at for me personally, because goodness knows I'm great at just like doing more, So I think the balance right now, I'd love to see it more balanced, but I still do a lot of both.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have a question for you. It's when you enter into a reading with somebody, is this a visual experience for you? I mean, is it something like, how do you experience that bridge you're building for the person you're working with?
Yeah. So when we talk about translating energy, you can get very specific. And for me, I have found that it really depends on the container also and the intention of the reading. So for example, if I'm working on stage and I'm doing audience readings for 2 hours, I know that every reading will run about 6 to 8 minutes. I need to keep it entertaining. I need to keep it fast. I need to be talking the entire time. I have no time for visuals, like no time. It's all thoughts. It's just, or maybe feelings, but it's just like thought after thought after thought. If I'm in a reading and I have 50 minutes, a lot of it will be just feeling in my body with an occasional image. That can also change depending on, at this point, I've been reading for like 13 years. I could go in, really get clued into my visual before I go into the reading, and it will be so much more visual. So it's like whatever sense I'm deciding I'm wanting to translate with, I can translate. But some of them work better for certain settings. If I'm doing radio, for example, morning radio, oh my God, it's like the most chaotic thing. You come in, they're like, good morning, we're doing readings. You got 3 minutes on the air with Fleur. And you're like, your mom died of breast cancer. She had 2 children. And they're like, 1 minute. And you're just like, and it's like, it's just like stream of consciousness. You have no time for an image. Like, you have no time for a feeling. You're just like, in that moment, I turn to like automatic writing. I'm just like, breast cancer, 2 kids, has, I don't know, a brother, needs to know that like all is going to be fine with fine or whatever it is, just like do. I feel like at this point, it's a funny thing and it's a challenge and it's something I love. When I'm in a new space, I'm also aware of how is it going to be captured? What's the sound bite? Sure, maybe I can pull information somewhere, but is that like the best information for this moment? And how, if we recognize that all information is available, I feel like the art maybe of where I'm at now is what story do I want to tell right now based with the information that I have, right? So I might not like go searching for something that's going to take too much time to explain. But if I'm on stage, for example, my goal for the night is storytelling. So I want to make sure that every person that comes forward, like, you have an image. So I'll be like, pickup truck, window rolled down, cigarette hanging out, your dad had a long ass beard, you were a kid sitting in the side. Like, this is like, we're now telling a story because that's what stage work is all about. That's very different from a one-to-one reading. It's very different from a podcast. It's very different from a radio show. It's very different. So it's like, yeah, how do I receive it these days? It just depends on what I'm asking for and the intention I'm setting as to how I want to receive it.
And when you really slow down and feel into this, like, when you maybe into meditation and when you're traveling into other places, is there a consistency in terms of the specifics of how you see the information and how it comes through?
In terms of a consistency,
like visually, like your own metaphor for how you navigate the other side.
Like within the senses? I'm not sure I understand.
Yeah, however you experience it.
Well, it comes through in different senses. If it's a visual image, it moves quite fast for me. Also because, again, visual images, it's very helpful in the beginning when you're first working or first translating information. Students will use it a lot as a beginning introduction. But for an image to be really useful once you're doing readings at like a faster pace, they have to change very fast. And I personally just at this point find the visual images to be quite limiting for myself, unless I'm wanting something incredibly literal about the way someone looked. So that will come through, but a lot of times it's like a fleeting daydream thing. I don't get too specific with the image in it's being like colored in, or because once I've said what needs to be said about that image, we're moving on, right? So it doesn't need to be like a fully fledged image for me. But I think it's also by choice. I don't know if I necessarily have ever wanted to just sit in a reading and be like, all I want is to paint the most perfect picture here, right? Because it would be slow.
Yeah, it's funny because when people think of mediumship, they think of images.
I know, yeah, the clairvoyant and like, yeah. And that could be how it works for some people. Again, it's like, how does your nervous system translate it? For me, it's interesting. I started off with images way in the beginning, but very quickly, I prefer sensing in terms of like using the body and then thoughts. It just goes so much faster.
Yeah, it's an easier way to get there. Yeah. So another thing, I think I was kind of like nudging at this. I read your book. This year. It's a fantastic book. It's an incredible read, especially if you're someone who's leaning into any sort of channeling. It's a must read.
Thank you.
And there's one chapter specifically I return to. It's about the threads.
Yes.
The threads are wands.
Which is such a, can I just say, I think you've mentioned this to me before, and it like really stopped me in my tracks. You're like, yeah, I returned back to it. I'm like, wow. Like, that's just like, it was such an honor to think that you like even chose to reread it again. It just feels really special.
Well, because, like I work with a lot of these energies, very different way than you. I do energy work with people. And when it came to me calibrating my own dial, it's what I call it. It's almost like when I'm at am I doing like the energy work and it's full on, it's all the way up to a 10. And when it's like kind of now, it's kind of chilling at a 3. In everyday life, if I'm in a meeting, it might be up to 4 or 5, like being very deliberate about it. And it finally felt like I had a metaphor to kind of control the flow of information. It's like, because like something will happen like a meeting and then like kind of thread falls down. I'm like, no, not now. Right. Or like when I'm navigating these specific pieces of information, it kind of felt like I had this metaphor. I could kind of like pull on these different strands based on what I needed.
Yeah.
And it didn't feel like hectic chaos anymore.
That's nice.
It wasn't like all these flowing like images and information, like a fire hose. It finally felt something where like I had the choice to interact or to pull or to integrate on my own pace. So that's why it really resonates and something I really like to revisit. But I would love to get your take on it. It's like kind of my integration of the information.
I mean, it was the chapter I knew I had to write, and it took the longest, and I was so frustrated with it. And it turned into 2 chapters, which I told you, because the chapter was, the basis of it is, okay, you go to a psychic. Is the future predictable? And what does that mean, right? Like, is it not? Which, yes, it is, because people are energetically predictable. And this is where this idea of the threads comes in. It's like, where are you placing your energy? Where's your prana flowing? How often is it flowing there, consciously or subconsciously? It creates this whole grid. And it started off with this question of, okay, how am I going to talk about the future being predictable, yet also free will? And also you've got purpose. Like, it's a very like complex situation. And what I came back to over and over again was this feeling of, I would come into somebody's energy, and for some people, it would be like so organized and so defined, and in that way their energetic habits, where they placed importance, what their values were, how they operated, so established that it was very easy to predict. Be like, 2 weeks this will happen, 2 months that'll happen, 2 years that'll happen, and they'd come back and be like, oh my God, it just was like, how? And I was like, well, you were energetically very organized. For good and bad, in good and bad ways, right? Like wherever you were going, like that's where you were going. And then other times it would be like, whew, like, this is a ball of yarn. And then sometimes it would even just like start off with going, you must feel very confused in this area of your life. They're like, yeah. I'm like, well, I can see why, because there's some of you going over here and there's some of you going over there, and I can't even make sense of it, right? It wasn't necessarily this defined path where it was predictable because it had been defined. It's like people were creating it. But a lot of times people were in very strong loops, very defined threads, walking that same line over and over and over again. And it didn't mean that you couldn't change it. But that again goes back to limiting beliefs and like subconscious and then yet at the same time, and this led into chapter 7, of course, there's like a deeper layer there that is purpose. But purpose, I found, was thematic, and it wasn't specific like the lines that we were creating. So it just didn't quite have that same, like our free will really existed in that sense of, well, where are you deciding to go energetically today, right? Over and over and over again. And then purpose was much deeper than that.
Yeah. I feel like it's a great way to kind of see energy and flow. It's just like, because you're right. Like some people, you have this feeling, it's like, this is chaos, right? And then you have others where it's like just very smoothly knit together like a nice sweater,
And to your point, what you were saying about working with people energetically, I found it to be true as well. And I realized how powerful the responsibility is of a reading, because I would read for people, and as I was speaking about these energetic loops, you could start feeling them shift, and you're like, it's a bit like Pandora's box in a way, but also Schrodinger's cat, where like, like, I don't know, like once you've looked, you've changed it. And that's also a very interesting conversation and might go in a tangent or like go down a rabbit hole. But it's that idea of once you've looked at somebody's pattern and you've made the subconscious conscious, once you've told someone, hey, look, you're doing this, we've now changed it, which means we've changed where they're going in the future. And that I find very interesting too.
Yeah. The observation, like it's almost like a massage in a way, right? Because you're kind of like taking it and you're just like showing somebody, like, hey, there's something under your couch, right? And you're like, well.
Totally. Yeah, I had a client actually did a reading for her 2 days ago, and I've done readings for her and her family for like 12 years. Like she was one of my first people. And she's done a lot of energetic work on herself. She's taking classes now, all the rest of it. And I just did a reading and she goes, what are you doing to me energetically? She's like, I've never noticed it before, but I don't think I was sensitive enough. And I was like, yeah, like I'm in there. Like I'm looking for stuff. Like, you know, I'm rummaging around. Don't mind me. Like I'm just kind of poking my way. But it was funny because she just hadn't ever felt it before. And then all of a sudden she goes, wait, I can feel that. Right. And it is that you're just kind of unraveling things. And that's not a part of the reading that I usually talk about, but I think it just goes back to once you've looked at it, it's been looked at.
Right. It's many layered. Because I remember my experience I had with you. It felt like somebody, like kind of afterwards, like I did feel a bit pulled apart. You know,
sorry.
It was very brief. I'll never forget it. You said to me that and I don't know why we chose to do this. I think,
it's a funny thing because because I don't read for family or friends. So I guess you're just like the lucky one who slipped in there.
Yeah, we very, very like spontaneously decided to exchange energy work. And and then I remember he said I was on a couch playing and there's Tetris pieces falling behind me, and I was very sad. And this took me back to the moment when my grandmother passed away. One of the saddest moments of my life. She was suddenly killed by someone texting while driving when I was young. And for the next couple of years, I sat on my mobile phone and I became like a top 10 world Tetris player. And my phone, I just sat there for I don't even know how many hundreds, if not thousands of hours playing Tetris. It was wild how that's precisely where you took me to my lowest point in my childhood. And it was fascinating. Like, it was just something that I hadn't even reflected on it, you know, because it's just such a lull, right? So, but to go like directly to that point was wild. And like the visual I saw was like you on top of my crown. It was kind of like you just taking a seat and kind of like a, you ever seen those dandelion flowers? The ones you blow in the wind?
Yeah.
You know, with all the little bits. It was like you were sitting there and all these like threads of information, like wires were coming through you. Like they were always coming to me, but you just like taken the position and could see which one you wanted to focus on and could like interpret them for me momentarily. Yeah.
It's interesting because it's, you know, it wasn't a full-fledged reading, but I would also say whenever I start a reading, there is a spiritual component for me where I start it off with, if you want to call it prayer or intention or whatever, but I'm like, what's the greatest need? Like, that's where I start. It's like, okay, well, what's the greatest need? And then I start from there, and everything else that I'm pulling at or looking at begins with what's the need. Just because I feel like, I don't know, like some of the psychic information one could get could be quite impressive, right? But that's not necessarily the need. And so sometimes the need is very simple or random. But yeah, it's in that sense of like pulling at things or looking at things. The way that I try to channel it as to, okay, we're headed somewhere, we're doing something with this is what's the need.
Why don't you read for family and friends?
Boundaries. I think ultimately the reason is I wouldn't be a good reader for them. It wouldn't be fair to them because I'm biased. Now, at the time that I did this for Nick, we had really just met, so I didn't know you that well. Um, but when it comes to someone who really has a burning question or a burning need, I wouldn't be the best reader for them because I'm not reading from a blank slate. And if I told myself I was unbiased, it wouldn't be true, right? That's not true that I am unbiased.
That makes total sense. For me, my most difficult readings and sessions have been with family and friends. And I do preface that I know that I'm probably coming in with some information and bias here. So take this as you wish. But I find those to be the most difficult ones to really decipher.
Yeah.
And also just wanting to really give some flowers and praise and acknowledgement to this incredible work that you're doing. One thing that I'm admiring from what you're sharing is your degree of control and choice with how you read, and hearing how you're able to move between clairvoyance and clairaudience and clairsentience in terms of how you receive the information. And even hearing you moving through like live streaming while you might be on stage or something, and just live streaming that information versus maybe when you're reading with someone being a little more deliberate and really seeing and sitting with that information. So really admiring like that degree of control and choice. That's very incredibly high, masterful work. And I know that a lot of this podcast has been about you as a medium. And you're also an incredible person. You're an incredible person. Incredible person, and also an incredible entrepreneur.
Yeah, thank you.
And the folks that we have on this podcast are entrepreneurs, and our audience is really, we really try to cultivate an audience of creators, of innovators, of designers, of folks that are forward thinkers. And so curious, from an entrepreneurial stance, is there any support that you're looking for in your business? Any calls that you want to put out for people to come into what you're doing and come into the work and support you?
Great question. Yeah, to preface, prior, I didn't really consider myself so much of an entrepreneur. But this year, we grew from me and an assistant to a team of 9. So we're really like at a completely different level. And it's looked like me reading a lot of books on leadership is what it's looked like. But it's been exciting because it's like new voices, new perspectives. What we really need, I think, is the translation to the tech world. Is ultimately, we've got a lot of wonderful people on the team, myself included, that are very creative. Like, we're very creative with and people oriented, and we can like
all women, by the way.
Yes, it
Not
is.
saying it's a bad thing. I'm just throwing out there.
It is 10 women. It is 10 women, and we manage when we get to Wix, and
I'm not saying women can't do tech. I'm just saying it's like so people oriented. It's like you have some of the most amazing women in the world on your team.
Absolutely. They're incredible. I think where we're hoping to grow is how do we create these platforms with these methodologies where somebody can access it and it's set up in such a way where it just is like that same human touch, that same experience. Which like leads me actually to something you asked, where do you see yourself in the future? Like the VR world, I think could be incredible with this, where it's like, okay, now you're in, I don't know where we're going to get, but like, what if you could measure physiological response at the same time that you're in this VR world and you're getting this neurofeedback, but you're also in that spiritual like pathway and the methodology and you're able to train yourself. That's what I'm really excited about. I mean, I get inspired by these apps that are the Calm app, for example. Like that's inspiring of like, how do you get this to the people that are interested? I think there are at the baseline, like everyone's interested in intuition because everyone would like some help and direction in their life. How do we translate that? How do we bring it into that kind of a world? How do we get better graphics to all of it? I don't quite know what it looks like, but I'm also like where I would love help, quote unquote, is that conversation, because I don't know the capacity of technology right now in that way. Right. I exist in my teaching world, in my reading world. I see it on the periphery, but I don't know what it can do. I feel like there's a world out there. I just haven't found the bridge.
100,000%. And I have so many thoughts and ideas, and that could be a whole other podcast episode. And I just want to check what your hunger level is.
Oh, like I am excited. Like 10 out of 10.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I meant hunger level in terms of
Oh.
continuing, like physical hunger level in terms of continuing this conversation, because what you just named could open up a whole portal.
Let's do it for a little bit. I'm all right. How are you guys' hunger level? What's your hunger level?
I mean, once you get me talking about this stuff, it's just
like
hunger doesn't even matter.
The flow state is here. Yeah. We don't even know what time it is.
Some dank ass Chinese food after this. So the way I see this going is like, one, it's one thing to know, like in your mind, like, oh, this is how I experience intuition. I think it's another thing to visually see it.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think the first thing would be like each one of the different things we're trying to map into it, mapping that to a visual representation.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, this is how I experience guilt, right? Like, in actually having a visual representation of what that is like. Now, and it could even be so far as to say, like, step into, like, I mean, you can do that with like just a web-based experience, but in AR, augmented reality or virtual reality, like stepping in and saying, I feel guilty right now. And then having that representation and then saying, I want to feel victorious. And then it knows it has that like visual save. So it helps you transition that energy in an honest way.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I think that's where this is all going, because it's all frequency and energy, but also it's my metaphor.
Yeah.
Right. Like actually translating that, like giving that to technology and figuring out how we get from person who feels in a state of guilt and shame into a place of victory and freedom. Right.
Absolutely.
Like that's the goal of the stuff. Or it's just one idea.
No, but I love, because I think it goes back to that toggle where we talked about, where you have to understand it and then you can bring yourself into the flow state. But that's part of the understanding. And the way that we're doing it right now is it's very preschool, but it really worked for me. It's just that emotion wheel, and anyone can Google it. It's just like, what emotion am I feeling right now? And where am I feeling it in my body? That's really hard for us, a lot of us, especially having grown up in a Dutch household where, we were like, and, that's the best they could do. But it was like, what is it feeling? We don't even know. It feels good. It feels bad. Like, that's it. So what you're saying, I think, is brilliant. It goes back to that, building the structure, building the foundation, and then slowly or in a fast way, like toggling people back and forth between understanding and flow and understanding and flow.
Yeah. And I also think seeing this as superpowers, like your ability to feel these emotions and to transition them, right? That's superpowers. I mean, that's self-mastery, right? So it's even like mapping these things like from emotions into something that's, I mean, how often can you be vulnerable with technology? Say, hey, I feel guilty. I feel shameful. I feel this. It's not the perception that most people take with tech. It's like, this is my best self, right? I feel fucking great, versus a place that they can be vulnerable. Say, hey, like, this is how I'm feeling honestly. And here's how we can actually transition it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not a lot of space for that.
I can't think of any online spaces, frankly.
Yeah.
And another thing that came to my mind when you mentioned VR was, when I think of VR and its potential connection to mediumship specifically, which is connecting to folks of the past, the potential to actually visualize these people in real time. By, if you know that someone's going to come in and maybe they want a reading with their grandmother. It's like, okay, well, upload 10 pictures of your grandmother before the reading. We're going to show you your grandmother, and that voice is going to be coming through your grandmother, and you'll be sitting in front of your grandmother.
That would be wild.
And so that's what came to my mind when you mentioned VR. I feel like there's there's this connection to VR in this work. There's this connection to AI in this work. There's this connection to biofeedback in this work.
Yeah.
And then there's the intersection of those different methodologies and technologies.
The most interesting AI I've seen, I mean, I just did a whole talk about AI, and I've been basically collecting like hundreds of links and references. The most interesting one I saw, and I didn't talk about this in the talk because I think it would have blown people's minds so much, is Facebook, believe it or not, has figured out a way to translate thought into words. So you can actually put a device in your head now, and it can, like, with very high accuracy, output the words that are happening from the mind.
It'd be amazing to find patterns and things like that.
I mean, even with the mediumship work you do, like when those messages come through, like trying to remove yourself as a barrier, or is that translated source? Like, it could even be useful for those words to flow through you, and you just sit and stay in meditation. You don't even have to necessarily talk.
I don't know if it would work like that though, because because like for me, at least in a mediumship session, I don't know how you guys work with your energy exchange. It's not just a receiving; it's also perceiving. Like, you go looking for it, right? Like, it is you're looking. I think that's the hardest work, is you're like, okay, this is a distraction. Where is the real root of the issue? Yeah. Like, let's just keep digging. We're digging. And it's like, but that would be it would be nice because, it'd be interesting. I'd love to play around with it. That sounds so cool.
Yeah, maybe it's easier applied to the Akashic record readers, right? Where the whole goal, correct me if I'm wrong, you went through the Akashic record reader training, is to get out of the way and letting the words flow. So I wonder if, there would be a correlation with you, getting into mantra, getting out of the way, and like what the AI would pick up is the words flowing through you.
That would be very fascinating to witness and to see.
Yeah.
Another thing that Nick and I were speaking about, a few times now, is training an AI with channeled information. So actually collecting the world's channels and having them train and have that be the training data for an AI, with the intention to make this type of information accessible for people. Right. But that's just one way to make it accessible. I actually prefer the way that you're making it accessible to people, which is actually allowing folks to access their own gifts and acknowledging that everybody can tap into that place and that transmission.
The AI thing is cool though.
Yeah. Just being able to interact with,
But it's even collecting like all these messages are coming through, because you have specific people who channel the Akashic records, who channel Gaia, who channel Archangel Michael, right? Taking all their messages, like the voice training data, putting it into a specific AI, and then you can ask it questions, because that's the data it's trained on. So it becomes a representation of the collective messages of all these works. Now it's getting to the point where we can now take different AI. Get this. They can talk to each other to train a new one.
Right.
So basically you could have a place where, you have all these different channelers go to train their specific instance of like the spirits that they're channeling. And then at the higher level, have like a master AI that's sucking up all this information and messages.
Yeah.
And it's something that people can go interact with. You can actually go speak to it and ask it questions.
I think it's brilliant.
It would be fascinating experiment, spiritual. It's funny because we have like grants for like all this like science and math and things like that. There's no big grants as far as I know for like spiritual.
I mean, that is like, if there was a goal in my lifetime, I would just be like, let's put some grants, like let's create like, I don't know, a research center. Let's like that is, if there is like the epitome of all, if I leave this lifetime behind and I've like, I don't know, created something, I'll be 90. I'll be like, here's the research institute. I'm going to go now.
Yeah.
You're on your own.
I think it's a 500-year plan.
Yeah,
like that would be something. If you actually had grant money that's all based on science, like crossover scientific.
That's my goal. Is like when I leave, it would be it's like, this is what you're going to do for the next 400 years. Like in terms of like, do what you want, but here's the the way to continue to feed it.
What would be the criteria for fun like that?
The criteria?
Yeah.
I think, for me at least, some version of tech, science, spirituality. Like, it has to be on the frontier.
So how do you define like the parameters and boundaries of spirituality? We struggle with this all the time. Like,
Well, they could have a board and people would vote on it.
Is it spiritual enough?
No, not is it spiritual enough, but like, does it fit within whatever philosophy or mission or vision you have at the time?
Yeah, but I think the hardest thing is drawing the lines of the spirit. It's like, where does it start and where does it end? In the context of technology and spirituality, people are like, what does it mean? You know, like, we get it all the time. And I'm like,
yeah. Well, I think like my company's vision statement is to give everyone the potential for a spiritual experience. Like, whatever that looks like. Like, whether it's a reading, whether it's a class, like, we're helping you have your own spiritual experience. And that can be defined in many ways. But
it's a beautiful mission.
Yeah, and in a way, it's bringing people back home. You know, because we are spirits having a human experience, not humans having a spiritual experience. And so bringing people back home in that way. I'm so excited by the idea of a research lab or a research institute that bridges these together and actually can run some experiments and run some prototypes and really innovate in this direction. Because I think what we're talking about here and what you're naming here is fundamentally world changing. Like, it's totally perspective shifting of the entire collective when you can create tools that allow people to access the other side or access the great beyond or access these things that may not be perceivable to the eye or to the ear, to the senses on a daily basis.
Absolutely. What were we going to say?
Yeah, and I think it starts with our own inner world. Like, I love that you kind of remove that complication as well. It's like, like everyone's like, it's the great beyond and all this stuff. It's like, nah, the information's in you.
Yeah. Like, we don't need to be like creating the information.
The great beyond. Sounds so ungraspable. The great beyond.
Like, when I wrote the book and when I teach, I'm like, the first class is always, let's just define some stuff. Just so we're all on the same page. Like, what does intuition mean? What is sight? Like, it doesn't even matter if your definition is my definition, but what we're going to be talking about is this. Because otherwise, it goes back to what would be spiritual, what wouldn't be spiritual. I think you would just define it.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, okay, you create a definition and somebody else can use the word in a different way, but within that sphere, this is what we're talking about.
Yeah, another interesting thing you touched on is proof, right? And this kind of neat, like this desire in science is to prove. And, you know, I've become unmarried to this completely. I just like say to everyone I preface, I'm like, these are my metaphors. You interpret it however you want, but this is the way that these higher beings, this higher self speaks to me. And it's going to be completely different for you, right? But I also think like that balance with the like proof as much as you can it is a worthwhile pursuit. There's actually a man, he's a billionaire, who has a I think I can't remember the size of the pot of money, but if you can prove
Randy, whatever his name is.
Yeah.
I think he's dead. I don't think that's a thing anymore, but yeah, he died.
Well, there's two of them.
Oh, there's two of them.
So there's one that guy's like, if you can prove any medium is real, then I'll pay you $1 million. There's another guy who actually has a fund that says it's more legitimate.
Yeah.
That's like $1 billion. That says if you can prove that the spiritual world exists, you win this grant money. So it's not there.
Sign me up.
Yeah, to fund projects.
We'll do it another way. We don't. That's the catch-22. Is like to do that. Like, can we have the $1 billion first?
That's the problem, right?
Because we can prove it. Don't worry. But I'm gonna need that money. Yeah, exactly.
If you had $1 billion, how would you allocate it today? Like in terms of the research and the things that you.
So I'm working with this research institute, and I told you a little bit about it. We're in the very beginnings of it, but they put me in the sound pod and they ran through all of the heard and unheard frequencies. And I was noticing that when we hit certain frequencies, it would really very strongly create a reaction at different parts of my body, different energetic levels of my body. And so as we ran through the frequencies, I would just in a microphone be like, here, right over here, like markers, right? I'd be like, that this is da 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 da. They ran it again. We started at a different point of the, I didn't know this, but they started at like a different point of the soundtrack. So obviously where I'm hearing the markers for me feels like it's at a different time because some of them I can't hear. And then they ran the numbers on it. And this is why we're going to continue working together, because the researcher, he was like, it's like you have perfect frequency pitch because they lined up completely. He's like, any error was probably because I didn't write it down fast enough. It like really was perfect frequency pitch. And I think like that's the place to start is, okay, what is frequency doing to the human body? And then the next kind of research I think that we're going to do is also brain states. It's like, okay, if I'm in reading mode, what frequency am I interacting with, right? How does the frequency change where I'm interacting? I think I love systems and organization in this world. And I think the first is like, how do we create our understanding of what space we're occupying when we're shifting into other states of awareness? Like if all the information exists, but we have to be in a certain spatial awareness and energetic awareness to receive it, where are those levels? What do they look like? What brain state do we need to be on? What frequency is being interacted with? I think it's like about mapping it out. And sure, maybe like the spirit world, we don't have that frequency quite yet. But then I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I mean, people forget that it's all frequency.
Mm-hmm.
Like even the perception of matter, touch anything around you,
Yeah.
it's not solid. These are many different atoms that are floating together very, very, very closely. There's still space between them that frequencies can run through.
Yeah.
Like everything is frequency. And once you start to see the world that way, it can get very trippy.
Yes.
Like you actually look at the wall, you actually look at solid material. Like these structures are just stuck together by different forces, but they're not actually together. There's nothing solid in front of you. It's all frequency. And beginning to see the world that way and the subtleties between it and measuring it and then like mapping that to intuitive outputs, where the frequency changes based on your intuition. Like that's...
Well, and this is why I think like VR and AI is so interesting too, because if we can get out of the need to be in the physical space of anything, if it is all frequency, then space-time, like all of that no longer matters. Because when I do all my readings over the phone, like I don't do it on Zoom. I'm not in person with a person. It's just on the phone. And that really trips people out. They're like, it's not going to work. How can you do this on the phone? I'm not even saying anything, right? And it's like, because it's frequency. Like you don't need to be anywhere. And I think that that's the jump that you can make. That's why it could actually work. Because I think sometimes when we talk about AI, VR, whatever, you're like, okay, well, maybe you're just giving people an experience and it's not real. But it could be real because space is not a defining limitation here.
Yeah.
Right?
But not with VR, not with AI, and also not with anything, in my opinion.
No, it's all frequency.
Yeah, the only reason that like even these cell phones can exist is because you're tapping into technology that exists. I can call you in WhatsApp across the world through all these interconnected pieces. Yeah. That's just a silicon embedded version of what already is. You can already tap into the frequency on the other side of the planet just by knowing very well that it exists. I don't think any of this is novel. We've just encompassed it into silicon.
Right. Yeah. Very good point. That's so exciting.
Yeah, there's a lot of cool overlap here. Good place to leave it. You hungry?
Well,
I'm hungry.
Yeah. So if we're leaving it, my last question would be, where can people find you? Where can people find your work? You also put a call out for, someone who may potentially want to invest $1 billion in this research institute. And so for the folks who may be listening that want to plug in or at least become more aware and more familiar with what you're doing, where's the best place for folks to find you, to reach out if they want to reach out? What does that look like?
Every handle has the same name. It's Medium, Medium. and then Fleur, which is my name, Fleur. So Medium Fleur, Instagram, website, mediumfleur.com. That's where I'm most active, is Instagram and the website. And you can always send us an email at info@mediumfleur.com. So always that same combination, Medium Fleur.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you so much, Fleur. Thank you for sharing your time, your presence with us. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you both.
One word that's really present for me is access,
Mm-hmm.
and like providing access for people to not only tap into their own gifts, but like creating the frameworks and giving the definitions that are graspable. I feel like so often anything in the realm of spirituality doesn't seem like it's clearly defined in a way where people can actually touch it or work with it or understand it. So thank you for bringing that down, bringing that into something that people can understand and access. And thank you for being here on this podcast.
Thank you, guys. You're such a joy. And thank you for both of your works and just the interest in the combining of it all. I'm excited to know you. Very excited. So thank you.
Peace.